friends, today I am going to be showing you how to make this really beautiful no-sew thumb fingerless mitt with the knitted base and the crocheted top. Now I have two different examples here that I'm going to show you. This is the one that we're going to be creating today. It has a slightly longer cuff. This was made with 40 rows on the Addi, and this was made with 30, so you can see a little bit of the difference there. While I was developing this pattern, I decided that I liked the cuff to be just a little bit longer, but if you prefer it to be a little shorter, 30 rows looks beautiful as well. Pardon me. And on the top portion here, you can just see how the difference in yarn, the yarn is a little bit thinner, this yarn is just a little bit thicker, so you can kind of see what that looks like. But the great thing about this is that this pattern is extremely adaptable. You can do it all in one color, you can do a different cuff than the top, you can really make it however you want, and it is a reversible pattern. So you don't have to be worried about, you know, which hand is which when you're putting these on. You can just throw them on and go. And you have no sewing of the thumb at all. There is no sewing seam here. It is just all one crocheted piece, which is fantastic. And the seam on the side as well is almost completely invisible. You really would not be able to see it unless you were looking for it, which I love about these mitts, is that that seam is so subtle and almost invisible and just really makes the entire pattern just really, really beautiful. So we're gonna go ahead and get started on these no-sew fingerless mitts because I hate making thumbs and sewing them on, and we will have a good time and get these worked up. So let's get started. Now I did want to say before I get my knitting machine up here that if you are looking for any of the things that I use in this video, please check out the links in the description. I'm going to have a 6mm crochet hook. I have stitch markers here that will be available at yarn@play.com. I also have these numbered stitch markers because with this pattern it is a little bit tricky to keep count of your rows. So I have those for my counting, and those are also available at yarn@play.com. So if you have not checked those out, definitely check out the link in the description. I will have everything that I use in this video always linked down below for you. So let me grab my knitting machine and let's get started. All right, so to get started, go ahead and clear out your counter here and cast on with some waste yarn in a different color than your main working yarn. I usually cast on between 5 and 10 rows of waste yarn to get my project started. Now I misplaced my yarn tensioner that I usually have, so I'm just going to have to keep a close track of my tension today. Make sure that I am keeping my tension consistent while I cast on and work up my rows here today. So there is 5 rows. I'll go ahead and do one more. Cut my yarn. Drop that in the middle. And then I'm going to grab my main working yarn. Today I am using Softly Baby from Ice Yarn in this really beautiful turquoise color. And so that is what my mittens are going to be made out of today. Now clear out your counter. Now I prefer a longer cuff on my mitts, so I am going to wind up doing a total of 40 rows in my main yarn color here. If you don't want it to be quite that long, you can do 30 rows, but I kind of like the look of the longer cuff, so that is what I am doing today. So I will go ahead and knock out these 40 rows and show you next steps from there. Alright, so I just finished up my 40th row. And this is a little bit awkward just because the machine is kind of small. It's a lot easier to do on the big king size to kind of slide your yarn in the middle. But we're still going to do it because we don't want to cut our working yarn. So I'm just going to kind of tuck that right in there and pull it all the way through. There we go. So that way I still have my working yarn connected and didn't have to break my yarn. And now we're gonna cast off with waste yarn again. Just another 5 to 10 rows. And then we'll be ready to move our machine and start with the crochet part. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and cut my yarn and continue to crank until this just falls off of my machine. Got hooked on a needle here. Alright, there we go. I got my cuff finished up. I'm going to move my machine and then I will show you where we're going to take this from here. Alright, so I have my machine moved and I have my tube here. Now I want to get my yarn back through the other way so I'm not fighting with my yarn while I'm crocheting. So I'm going to just reach my hand back through, grab my big thing of yarn here, pull it through so my strand is coming out the top how I want it to. And then we're going to take this and we're going to fold it up in on itself, just like this. And it should work out where your tails from your waste yarn and your working yarn are all right about in the same spot. And that is where we're going to start to crochet this together. Alright, so I'm using a 6mm hook today. You could easily size down to a 5.5. With this yarn, this is just what I had on hand, so this is what I'm using today. So when we do this, to join this together, you want to look for where your ends are at. So this is my long tail here. This one is my working yarn that is still connected to my main ball of yarn. So I see that with this, I'm coming through right here. You see that stitch? That is the one that my working yarn is attached to. So I'm going to go ahead and put my hook through that stitch right there. Then I'm going to look on the opposite side and see what the last stitch is before my blue yarn is coming out on this side. And it will have white or contrasting waste yarn going through it. So it's down here. Always make sure you pick up all the stitches that have waste yarn running through them or you will drop stitches. So now that I have my hook poked through both of those, I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop. And then I'm going to chain 2, 1, 2, just like that. And that's going to count as my first single crochet. And then I'm going to go ahead and single crochet all the way around, picking up all of these stitches in order to bind off this knit cuff, and then we can start with our crochet portion. So look for your next stitch on the outside of your work that has working yarn coming through it, and for me it's going to be this one with the white tail coming through. So I'm going to poke my hook through there, and I'm going to look on the opposite side. And my next stitch that has working yarn coming through it is right next to this one where my blue tail's coming through, right there. So I'm going to go ahead and poke my hook through there, yarn over, pull through both of those stitches, yarn over, and pull through 2. And I made my first single crochet. And we're going to keep doing that all the way around, so just looking for the next stitch that should be contrasting with your waste yarn. And just single crochet all the way around until you get back to the start of the round. And you have all of this caught so that you can start taking off your waste yarn and continuing with your project. And I will meet you back at the end of the circle. Alright, so I'm nearing the end of this binding off row here, and I have one more set of stitches to pick up. And now I'm going to look for my top chain 2. So there's my chain 1, there's my chain 2, and I'm going to go ahead and slip stitch to join right in that chain 2 space. Snug that down a little bit. And now I am ready to take off my waste yarn. Now with the pattern that I use, the stitch that I use, it gives it a really beautiful thick fabric, but it can be a little bit hard to keep track of your rows. So I'm going to be using these numbered stitch markers today to help me keep track of what row I'm on while I'm working up my project. If you are interested in grabbing these, check out yarnatplay.com. I will have these available on my website if you would like to purchase some for your own. They definitely come in very handy for keeping track of row counts. So that was my first row, so I'm grabbing my number 1, and I'm just going to pop that right here to hold that stitch so I can easily get my waste yarn off. And I'm going to pull out my waste yarn, and then we will go ahead and continue on with the rest of our mitten. Now, if you are not familiar with how to get your waste yarn out on your first row, because if you pull on this here, it's just going to start to cinch it up. And we don't want it to get cinched up, but you can see how when you pull on it, it kind of, you can see which one it is. It's that tight one right there. If you just pull it out of a few of the stitches there, and then kind of pull, that'll drop those stitches, and then you'll have this here. And if you just pull on this all the way around, it gets all of those loops off of there, and you can now very easily just pull out the rest of this yarn without having to cut it at all. Because I know that sometimes when you're not familiar with taking waste yarn off, some people feel like they have to cut it to get it out, but there actually is a way to do it without cutting. All right, so there we go. We have our row of single crochet, which has bound off our cuff, and we are ready to get on with the rest of our project. So I am going to take this stitch marker out, put my hook back in, and now every time we finish a round, we're going to do a chain 2. So it's going to be a slip stitch to join in the top chain 2, and then another chain 2, and then we're actually going to turn our work so that the fabric is very consistent in its appearance, because otherwise there's portions where you have to turn and other portions where you technically don't have to, but if you don't turn every time, it makes your fabric look a little goofy. So we're going to be turning our work every time as we do our rounds. So I'm going to go ahead and chain 2, 1, 2, and I'm going to pop my stitch marker into that top chain 2 so I don't lose track of it and it's easy for me to find. And I'm going to turn my work. And I'm going to actually grab this tail from the inside and just kind of pull this down. We'll weave that in later. But for right now, just kind of get that out of the way. So I am looking for my next stitch here, which is going to be this one. And I am going to do a pattern of double crochet, single crochet, double crochet, single crochet. I don't know what that stitch technically is called, but that is the pattern that we're going to be doing. So in the first stitch, do a double crochet, and the next do a single, and then in the next do a double, and then a single, and we're going to keep doing that until we have a total of 8 stitches. So I just did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or excuse me, we're not doing 8 stitches, we're doing 6 stitches. Because we got to do 2 increases on our row right here. So we just did 6 stitches, and now we're going to do an increase. And the way that we're going to do our increase is this is our next stitch right here. I just finished a single crochet. I'm going to go ahead and do a double crochet into the next stitch, and then into that same stitch I'm going to do a single crochet, and then I'm just going to keep going with my pattern. So there's going to be a double crochet here, and a single, and we're going to keep doing that around until we get to the opposite side, and then we're going to do one more increase on this second row. That way, because it just needs to have a little bit more width for the palm area of your hand, since it's not as skinny as your wrist is, we're just doing a slight increase to make this come out just a little bit more. Single, double, single. And then when you have 6 stitches left until you get to the end, which I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm going to go ahead and do my next increase. So in this one, I just did a single crochet. I'm going to do a double, and then a single in the same stitch, and then I'm going to finish out my pattern and then slip stitch to join over here. Double, single, double, single, and a double in the last stitch. So you'll see here, even with our increases, we have a double crochet on this side of our chain 2 and a double crochet on this side of the chain 2. So that is how it should work out. You should always either have doubles on either side of your chain 2 or singles, depending on what row you're on. Because I'm going to show you where we go from here. So pop your stitch marker out. Find that top chain 2 back that you just took your stitch marker out of. Slip stitch to join, snug that down a bit, chain 2. Now I'm going to find my number 2 right here because I just finished 2 rows. That first row of single crochet and then that row of our first pattern row, that was 2 rows total. So I'm going to pop my number 2 right in there, and I'm going to turn my work. And since we ended with a double crochet stitch right here, the way that this pattern works is you're going to do singles in the top of doubles, and you're going to do doubles in the top of singles. And that is how it works, and that's how it's going to go for the entire pattern. So since this is a double crochet right here, I'm going to do a single crochet, and then a double into the top of that next single, and a single into the top of the next double, and a double into the top of the next single. And we're going to keep doing that all the way around till we get to our slip stitch to join. So I'll meet you back around here at the end. Okay, so I'm at the end of my round here. I need to do my single crochet into the top of my last double from the previous row. And then I'm going to find where my stitch marker is. Poke my hook through there. Pop my stitch marker out. Excuse me, there we go. And slip stitch to join. And that's how we're going to do every row until we have a total of 7 rows. So chain 2. And now I want my number 3 stitch marker right here, since I just finished my 3rd row. Now I'm going to turn my work, and since I just ended on a single crochet, I'm going to start with a double crochet. So keep doing this until you have a total of 7 rows, and then I will show you how to do the increase rows to start to form the thumb of the work. And I will meet you after you have completed your 7 rows. All right, so I just finished up my 7th row. And I'm going to start doing increases to do the thumb portion so that this thumb sticks out, and we can avoid having to sew a separate thumb piece here. So the way that this is going to work is you're going to do the same pattern that you've been doing for a total of 11 stitches, and then we're going to do a couple of increases, and then we're going to finish up. So I'll show you exactly how that's going to work. So I just slip stitch to join here. I'm I'm going to do my chain 2, 1, 2. I'm going to turn my work, and then I'm going to keep following that same pattern until I get a total of 11 stitches that I've worked. So the first one, since this is a single, is going to be a double. And double is 11. So in our next stitch, we're going to do another increase just like we did on the first row. And we're going to do increases for the next 2 stitches right here. So for the next stitch, I'm going to do a single crochet and a double crochet, both into the same stitch. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing again. A single crochet and a double crochet into the next stitch. And those are our increases. Now, if you want to mark where your next increases are going to be so that you don't have to count out your stitches next time, you could go ahead and pop a stitch marker in there. I'm going to use one of these cute little puppy dog ones. And you want your increases are going to be in these 2 stitches right here. So the 2 that are closest together in your increases that you just did. So we just finished this increase, but I'm not going to put my stitch marker in that double crochet. I'm going to pop it in my single crochet right there. 1 stitch back, because that's going to be the stitch that I do my first increase in on my next row around. So go ahead and finish this. Slip stitch to join and turn, and I will show you where we're at for our next increases. All right, so I did finished my row, did my slip stitch to join, did my chain 2 and turn, and worked my way back around to my stitch marker where I put it in for mark my increases. So I finished my last stitch right before my stitch marker. I'm going to pop this out here, and I'm going to do a double crochet and a single in that next stitch, and a double crochet and a single in the next stitch for my next row of increases. So there's my 2 increases right there, and I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did last time. I'm going to pop my stitch marker not in that first stitch right there, but the one right next to it, because that's where our next increases are going to go on our next round. So I will finish this up and meet you back there. All right, so I've made it back around to my stitch marker, and I'm going to do my increases again. So we're doing a total of 4 rows with the thumb increases. So this is my 3rd row of doing thumb increases. So we'll have 1 more row to go after this. And I just finished with a double, so I'm going to do a single and a double in the next stitch, and a single and a double in the next stitch, popping my stitch marker back in that stitch that is 1 behind the one I just finished, that single crochet right there. And then I'm going to keep going, and I will meet you back at the stitch marker. And our 4th row goes just a smidge different, so I'll show you how that works, and then we will be on our way to finishing up our mitten. Okay. So I'm very nearly back to my stitch marker here where I'm going to be doing my increase stitches on this 4th row of increases, which is our last row of increases. I have 2 more stitches to go before I get there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my next stitch, which is going to be a double crochet. And this is where the start of the thumb opening is going to be. And so I need to mark that. So you should have 1 stitch between your stitch marker and the stitch that you just completed, and then go ahead and pop your stitch marker into that stitch that you just finished, because you're going to need to be able to find that back in just a minute. All right? Now I'm going to do my single crochet here. I'm going to pop this stitch marker out and do my 2 increases like I have been doing. So double crochet and single crochet into the same stitch, and then double crochet and single crochet into the next stitch. And now I want you to do 2 more stitches. So a double crochet and a single crochet. And then you need to stop a second because we got to connect our thumb to make that thumb opening hole. So do 2 more stitches. The next one for me is going to be a double crochet. And then it's going to be a single crochet. Now we're going to stop right here. So there should be a total of 8 stitches between your stitch marker and where you are here. So let's just count to make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and my stitch marker is in that 8th stitch. All right. So the way that we're going to do this to connect this, because you can see how the thumb is coming out the side here, and we need to connect this here so that we can continue to work up with the rest of our mitten. So the best way that I've found to do this is pull up a bit of a loop, pinch right here, and slide your hook out. Now find your stitch marker on the opposite side, and what you're going to do is you're actually going to put your hook in, not into the stitch that you have your stitch marker into right here, but the one just back from it. All right, so that's going to be a single crochet on the opposite side. I'm going to slide my hook into that stitch, one behind where my stitch marker is. I'm going to grab it and put it through that loop as well. And I'm going to snug this back down. And then I'm going to hook that yarn and just pull it through that stitch. And now we have it connected and we created a hole for the thumb. And then from here, you're just going to continue to work the rest of your round. So I have my next stitch is a single crochet, so I'm going to do a double into the top of that, and then a single into the top of the next, and I'm going to keep working until I get to the end of this round, and then I will walk you through how we go around this corner right here to continue on up. But that right there is probably the trickiest bit of this whole mitten. So if you made it through that, you're doing really, really well. And you don't need to keep this stitch marker in there anymore. Once you have your thumb made, you can pop that out. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go around. I'm going to do my slip stitch to join the chain 2. I'm going to turn my work, and then I will meet you back over here and I will show you how to get through that little turn right there. All right. So I have just a couple of stitches to go before we get to this connected section here. Oh, I'm a little fuzzy on my yarn. There we go. So I just finished a single crochet. I'm going to do a double into the next single. Right there. And then this stitch here, that is the start of my connection. You see this stitch right here? That is a double. So I'm going to do a single into the top of that. And now I'm going to work a stitch into this hole right here where my yarn is connected, because that stitch is still part of my main round. This stitch is not considered part of the thumb. Only these 8 stitches here are part of the thumb. So this stitch right here that we connected with is part of our main body of our stitch here. So I'm going to go ahead, and that's a single crochet, which falls in line with my pattern because I just finished a single crochet here. So I am going to yarn over, find that stitch, and I'm going to do a double crochet into that stitch, and then I'm just going to finish my round. So single crochet into the next double, double into the next single, and keep on going. And now from here, the rest of your rows that you work up, you should not have any issues in this area at all. It should work up exactly the same way that you did these stitches down here. Now I'm using my numbered stitch markers again because we did 7 rows down here. We did 4 rows of increases for the thumb. Now we're going to complete another 7 rows up here, just exactly the same way that we did down here, okay? And that's going to finish up the main portion of our mitt. And then the only thing that we will have left to do is just a little bit of crochet right here to make that thumb come up just a little bit longer. So go ahead, keep track of your row counts. Do your last 7 rows exactly the same way that you've been doing them this whole time to finish out the top, and I'll show you what I do to finish out the top when you get there. All right, so I have just completed my 7th row here. I'm going to slip stitch to join, just like we've been doing this whole time, into that chain 2. Snug that down. Now what I like to do for the top of my mitt is to actually do a row of slip stitch around. That just keeps this from stretching too much and getting stretched out over time, because if you're wearing these on a regular basis, things just tend to stretch a little bit. And so I want to do just a slip stitch to join around the top there to make sure that over time things will not get too stretched. So I just turned, and I'm just going to do a slip stitch in every stitch all the way around. And then we will tie off and get started on our thumb, and then our mitten will be done. All right, so I'm on my last stitch here. I just did a slip stitch in that last stitch. This right here is a slip stitch, my first one, and I'm actually going to slip stitch right back into that as well, just to kind of close what could be a little gap there. And then I'm going to chain 1, trim my yarn, leaving a nice long tail for sewing in, pull through, and snug that down. Now this, I designed this to fit the vast majority of people. So if you find, excuse me, still fighting a little bit of a bug. If you find that you need this to be longer, whether that is longer down here or longer up here, you can just adjust the amount of rows that you do. So including that single crochet row that we did with our waste yarn on, we did 7 rows, then 4 rows of increases for the thumb, and then 7 rows up here. I would not change necessarily the rows of 4 increases for the thumb, because if you do too many rows of increases, this is going to start going way out here. So I think that on average, most people should be able to stick with the 4 rows of increases for the thumb. And then if you need to change how many you do down here because you have a longer portion of this on your hand, your palm down here is a little longer, or if you need to add a row or 2 up here because you want these to come down a little farther, you can do that as well. So it is very adjustable. And if you want it to be a little bit wider, you can just add extra increases on that row down here to make it come out just a little bit farther. But my goal was to make this to fit the majority of people. And I think that I've gotten about as close as I can, because this fits just a bit snug on me and I have very large hands. So I think that this would probably fit the majority of people. So that is our top finished, and you can see how it doesn't have the same level of stretch right there. It kind of holds its shape a little bit. And now we're going to go ahead and start working on our thumb right here, just to extend this up just a little bit, so that rather than it cutting off right here, it's going to come up to about your knuckle. And so that way it just keeps your thumb a little bit warmer, but still keeps the end of your thumb free so you can, use it for your phone and everything else, which is kind of the appeal of fingerless gloves. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my main color here again. And I will say too, if you decide that you don't want to use this pattern, you want to do a different crocheted mitt on top, you can still use the same joining technique and adapt the crocheted section however you choose. But it's really nice to have that knitted kind of bottom here so that it keeps nice and snug around your wrist, and then you don't have to do the crochet ribbing, which some people don't mind it. I personally do not enjoy doing crochet ribbing. So if I can avoid it, I'm going to do that. So to start on our thumb work here, I'm just going to make a slip knot, just like I normally would if I was going to start crocheting. Put that on my hook and snug that down. And now I'm going to be looking for my stitches here. Now we're not going to follow the same pattern of double, single, double, single. like we did for the rest of our mitt. With this, we're just going to do single crochets around. We're going to keep it nice and simple. So don't be too anxious about having to be like up, down, up, down, up, down, and keeping that pattern consistent. I tried to do it. I just found it a little fiddly and didn't want to mess with it. So we're just going to do single crochets. So you can see here that this stitch is the one that we worked into to do our join. So without this stitch right here, we should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that is what we want. We want to have 8 stitches around. So you actually do not want to work into this stitch right here. If you can see that, and that all makes sense. So this stitch right here, we are going to avoid, and we are going to work into these 8 stitches around. All right? Now, ultimately, you can start in any stitch around that you want to. I don't think it really matters where you start. Just keep an eye out for this stitch right here. You can even pop a stitch marker into that if you want to, just so you know when it comes around, hey, that's not the stitch I want to work into. I'm skipping that one, and I'm going straight from here to here. All right? So I'm just going to start right here, and I'm going to do a standing stitch to join. So poke your hook through with that slip knot on there, yarn over, pull it through, so you have 2 loops, yarn over, and pull through 2. So that is a standing stitch single crochet. Now I'm just going to single crochet in every stitch around the thumb here to do our total of 8 stitches to go around. And now the only row where this will hopefully be a little bit fiddly or a little bit tricky is this first row. And we're going to do a total of 3 rows of just single crochet stitches around in order to extend that thumb up a little bit. So here I am getting close to the end. I see where my stitch marker is. I want to go into this one here. And I do not want to go into the next one. Okay, and the next one that I would go into is where I started my standing single crochet. So I'm actually just going to pop the stitch marker out of here because I don't need it anymore. And I am going to find the top of my standing single crochet stitch right here, and I am going to slip stitch to join, snug that down a little bit right there, and I'm going to do chain 2 and then single crochet in every stitch around again for our second row of single crochet. So I've just finished up my second row of single crochet stitches. I'm going to find the top of that chain 2 and do a slip stitch to join. Snug that down, chain 2, and then do one last row of single crochet stitches. And you will have finished up your No Sew Fingerless Mitt with the knitted wrist piece. Now you'll notice on the thumb here, I'm not turning my work because it's just too fiddly with a hole this small to be going back and forth. And since it's just single crochet, it doesn't really require it. I don't have to keep the fabric a certain way on this section. So keep it simple, avoid complicating things unnecessarily, and there we go. So find that top of your chain 2, just like we've done on every row so far. This one's a little bit small, there we go. And slip stitch to join right there. And now I'm actually just going to do a slip stitch just in the next stitch, and then I'm going to chain one, leaving a nice long tail for sewing in, and pull that through and snug that right down. And there you have it. Now I know that that thumb might look just a little bit small, but even for me, with my big old hands, that thumb actually fits just about perfect. So it doesn't feel too tight at all around the thumb for me, but it's still cozy and warm, so it's not sliding up or down. Like, it's gonna stay right where I want it to. And with the 7 rows down here, it comes just a smidge below where my wrist is, but it looks just fine. Like, it hits in a good spot for me. I like where that hits right there. And then on the end of my fingers, I prefer my mitt to come up just a little bit higher on my pinky, so it's not like right down here. I want it to come up just a little bit higher so I get a little bit more coverage so that my fingers stay just a little bit warmer, but I can still use my phone and be just set. And then you can see here how that wrist cuff there works for that. Now remember, I have very large wrists and hands, so, you know, this is stretched out a little bit on me. I'm not anxious about it, but I think for the average person, this will fit just perfect. It won't be stretched out because their wrists probably are not nearly as wide as mine are. And it just has that beautiful fabric and pattern. And it's nice and warm and cozy, has a great texture to it, and there is no seam at all around this thumb. None. Which is amazing. Having a mitt with no sew, so you don't have to worry about that. The only thing you have to sew in are your ends. And if you can see here on the side, whew, can I turn my hand that way? You can't even see where our seam is up the side here. Like, you really can't, because it blends in so well with the rest of our stitches. So this, I mean, you can barely see it, but no one except someone who assembles things is going to see that. And odds are they're not going to see it while you're wearing it either. So that is our mitt completed. And then all you have to do is just weave in your ends, which you should have a total of 4 ends to weave in. This one in here, I usually, when I sew it in, I just do a little knot and then tie it in, just because this is technically loose and could pull out if you wanted it to, but obviously no one wants that. So when I sew this one on, I do just tie it off and then shove it down into the fabric of the knitted portion of the cuff. So that is it, Yarny friends. I hope that that was helpful. I hope that you enjoyed that tutorial, and I cannot wait for you to try out this really fantastic mitten pattern with this nice long knitted cuff and this beautiful crocheted top portion with the no sew thumb. Now, if you are interested in any of the stitch markers that I used today, my little puppy dogs, or my number tracker stitch markers, those are all going to be available at yarnatplay.com, so definitely check that out. And in the meantime, if you have not subscribed to the channel yet, or you have not seen what else is going on, definitely check the links down in the description. Subscribe to the channel if you found this valuable and enjoyed this tutorial, and be sure to give this video a thumbs up as well. That goes a really long way of telling YouTube that, hey, this content is worth sharing around. All right, thanks so much for hanging out with me today, Yarny friends. Can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.